There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch, Michael Byler.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. Folks, as Police Commissioner, Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison said, today's a good day. And with that, he meant that the task force that he established over 1 year ago, consisting of Suffolk County Police, FBI, New York State Police, Suffolk County District Attorney's Office investigators, was established specifically to work on the Gilgo Beach, as known, Long Island serial killer cases. And Rodney Harrison, coming with a tremendous resume from the NYPD, he was the chief of detectives in the NYPD, and he was also the chief of department. So he came to Suffolk County with a resume that was second to none. And he brought a lot of the NYPD know-how to Suffolk County, and he and his investigators, his chief of detective, the Suffolk County DA's office, the FBI, the state police, we cannot thank them enough. They did an unbelievable job in a case that was thought to be almost unsolvable. And, you know, when you look at this case, what made this case so difficult is that the bodies weren't recovered for over 10 years. So we all know, anyone that's been in this business of investigating the deaths of human beings knows that decomposition, the degradation of evidence, all of those things exist on this case. However, this task force was neither daunted by that. They never lost faith in their skills. They never lost faith in the fact that they were working for the deceased as well as the families of the deceased, and they did an unbelievable job. On the screen right now, the victims who were identified, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, 25 years old, from Norwich, Connecticut. She had been missing since 2007. Melissa Bartolome, 24, from the Bronx, missing since 2009. Amber Lynn Costello, she was last seen in North Babylon. She's 27. And Megan Waterman. Now, he hasn't been charged with all of the homicides I just mentioned. Or he's been charged with 3 of them. Melissa Bartolome, Amber Lynn Costello, and Megan Waterman. So the suspect was arrested last night in Manhattan. So he was arrested for the series of killings of women that were discovered in Gilgo Beach on Long Island South Shore. The killings terrorized residents for more than a decade, as body after body was discovered in the remote area about 40 miles from Midtown Manhattan. In May 2010, Shannon Gilbert, a 24-year-old from Jersey City, New Jersey, who was a sex worker, was reported missing on Long Island. She disappeared during an escort job in Oak Beach, a gated community 3 miles from Gilgo Beach. 7 months later, Suffolk County Police discovered 4 bodies wrapped in a burlap along Ocean Parkway, 3 miles from where Miss Gilbert was last seen alive. In 2011, they were identified by DNA as Amber Lynn Costello, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Megan Waterman, and Melissa Bartholome. All had been in their 20s and working as escorts, and later that year they found the remains of Valerie Mack, a 24-year-old mother from southern New Jersey who had paid the bills as an escort and been missing for 20 years. In all, the remains of 9 women, a man, and a toddler were discovered in the area. The police have said they believe some of the deaths were the work of a serial killer, but the investigation bore little fruit for years. So at this point, we know that the person arrested is Rex Heuermann, a male white, age 59, from First Avenue in Massapequa Park. So he lived close to the Gilgo Beach area, but he was a Long Islander who worked in Manhattan at a small architect firm in which he was the proprietor. Now, the Suffolk County Police today, I'm not going to go all over all of it. There was an extensive press conference by the district attorney, the Suffolk County District Attorney, and so much information was given out in that press conference. Some information that myself, as a former homicide investigator, cringed that he was releasing this to the public. And he's the district attorney. His name is Tierney. So he gave an extensive press conference today, and I'll go over some of the evidence that he discussed that they have against this defendant, Rex Heuermann. But at first, I want to play a little bit. Every news station was out there. Many of these news stations have been covering this case since the very beginning. And this case really instilled fear in the population of Long Island, Suffolk County, and any women that would fear someone like this, a serial killer, or who wouldn't fear this guy. And the families, of course, had to live with this. And many fingers were pointed over the years that the police perhaps weren't doing a good job, because after all, many of these victims were sex workers. And the point of view that many of the families took was like, oh, they're not important to the police. But I can tell you, as a former NYPD detective sergeant, that any victim is important to us. And I believe the Suffolk County Police, as proven in the last few days, worked as hard on this case as they would have on any other. And the fact that they put together this task force, it definitely reaped results.
Bombshell arrest shocking New Yorkers on Long Island and Manhattan. An architect facing murder charges in those Gilgo Beach murders. News 4 has the exclusive video showing Rex Heuermann last night, right before investigators arrested him in Midtown Manhattan. And today, only News 4's cameras were there as he was escorted out of a Long Island precinct. The 59-year-old has pleaded not guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of second-degree murder. He's accused of killing 3 of the so-called Gilgo Four, women's remains found along Ocean Parkway in Gilgo Beach back in 2010. He is the prime suspect in a 4th killing, but not charged for now. We have live team coverage tonight of the case and the reaction. Let's start with News 4 Chief Investigative Reporter Jonathan Deans to explain John, some disturbing things that police say they found that led to the arrest.
Yeah, Natalie, the Suffolk DA says it was a task force that developed the leads about a man trolling the web for child porn and prostitutes. Cell phone records allegedly show that man, using aliases, had been in contact with several of the victims. And they say advanced DNA technology brought in results last month that helped break this case. Rex Heuermann was led away, accused of being the so-called Gilgo Beach killer. This Manhattan architect is a married father of 2. He pleaded not guilty in court. But prosecutors say they can link him by DNA, cell phone records, and other evidence to that beach, and 3 bodies found there.
Rex Heuermann is a demon that walks among.
Rodney Harrison is a superstar. And he, like many of the great investigators in Suffolk County, the FBI, Suffolk County DA's office, and the state police, they deserve thumbs up by all of us for making this arrest, which is nothing less than unbelievable.
Among us. A predator that ruined families.
Heuermann is also considered a suspect, but not charged in the murder of a 4th woman.
We executed over 300 subpoenas, search warrants pertaining to this individual to find out more information.
Midtown Manhattan office that detectives were seen moving in to make the arrest. Then, Suffolk County police detectives, with the help of state police and the FBI, went to his Massapequa Park home, searching for additional clues. Police were also seen along Fifth Avenue today as they went in searching his architecture offices. All this the culmination of a decade-long investigation. Officials spoke as relatives of some victims looked on.
We're going to convict him and we're going to hold him responsible for what he did.
It was DNA testing from a sample taken from this pizza box Heurmann threw away.
You know, folks, we've done numerous shows and we always talk about surreptitiously is the big word we use of collecting DNA. And the investigators watched him throw out this pizza. When you throw something out, you have no expectation of privacy. That's garbage now. The police collected this, processed it for DNA so they could make comparisons against DNA that they had from this case. So again, surreptitiously, you learned that word on this show, collected this DNA without a search warrant, without getting a court order for a swab. They collected it from this pizza.
Police say broke the case wide open. They say they matched that DNA sample to a male hair found on duct tape of one of his alleged victims. They also say they found a hair belonging to Heuermann's wife on duct tape of another victim, presumably taped from their Massapequa Park home, because police say the wife was away traveling when Heuermann would seek out prostitutes for sex and murder. Investigators say they believe Heuermann is linked to 4 of the 11 bodies, though not all other remains are necessarily homicides. The investigation ongoing. Other evidence against Heurmann includes witnesses who tell police they saw victim Costello with a white male customer, 6'4" to 6'6", in his mid-40s with bushy hair. A similar description to Heuermann. Prosecutors say the serial murders were, quote, planned and heinous in nature. His alleged victims were found tied with tape and in burlap, that he allegedly used burner phones to meet the women. Investigators showed pictures of Heuermann in cell phone stores, allegedly buying those burners, and they point to cell phone tower records that led police to long suspect the killer had ties to both Massapequa Park and Midtown Manhattan, with some calls coming from right at or near his architecture offices. In court, the 59-year-old Heuermann denied wrongdoing. The accused killer ordered held behind bars. This as we await word from investigators if any additional evidence might have been found during those searches of his home and office. Natalie?
All right, John, thank you for the latest there. And we have been hearing from Heurmann's neighbors, of course, shocked that the person living right next door is a suspected serial killer. All day, law enforcement has been in and out of the home you see there in Massapequa Park, taking away evidence, including Heurmann's truck, a key link in the case, according to prosecutors. News 4's Paisy Chang live in Massapequa Park with how people living nearby are reacting. Paisy.
Yes, that's right, Natalie. Right now, police have brought in 2 large box trucks, and we've just seen investigators starting to bring out some boxes and bags of evidence. This is not going to be over anytime soon. They have been here all day patiently sifting through what evidence was there. Now, neighbors here in this neighborhood are just shocked that the alleged Gilgo Beach killer had been living right under their noses.
Police towed away this Chevy Avalanche pickup truck, a key clue that helps lead them to the alleged Gilgo Beach killer.
It's crazy. It's mind-blowing.
A stunning arrest, particularly shocking to his next-door neighbor.
We'd say hello to each other once in a while, and that was it. The guy's been quiet, never really bothers anybody. We're kind of shocked, to tell you the truth.
Investigators clad in protective gear went into his First Avenue home.
You know, folks, one of the things that we're going to learn about also is people this case can get very confusing because the bodies were recovered after Shannon Gilbert in 2010. I believe in May 2010, Shannon Gilbert was reported missing. As a result of searching for Shannon Gilbert, they recovered the remains of these 4 other bodies, now known as the Gilgo Four. It's unknown. There's 11 potential recovered bodies in the Gilgo area. Not all of them are, I believe, and I think it's been said, are the work of Rex Heuermann. But one question that begs to be answered right now is, what was he doing for all these years? Does he have other bodies tied to him? What else was he was still? One of the reasons the police pulled the trigger and made this arrest was because he was still frequenting call girls, and he was purchasing, as you saw, video of him going into these phone stores buying burner phones. He was still active in whatever his criminal activity was, in this instance patronizing prostitutes, which would be, of course, using call girl services. So the Suffolk County Police, of course, were worried that he was going to kill someone else. So I don't know if this forced their hand to move in more quickly than they would have. Did this force their hand to make the arrest earlier? But if you watch the press conference today, the amount of evidence they have, and really solid evidence, is incredible. It's really actually incredible. And of course, the defense attorney is going to say, oh, it's all circumstantial. Okay, right, it's circumstantial, but DNA evidence, again, we spoke about it, and you guys who follow us from the Koberger case and the Idaho quadruple murders of Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogan, Kaylee Gonsalves, and Zaina Kernodle, the 4 Idaho students, you know the power of DNA evidence. But this evidence, the amount of years that went by, technology actually caught up to the point where they were using what's going to be the miracle of the 21st century, is investigative genetic genealogy. And so far, all these major cases that we're seeing, investigative genetic genealogy, I should learn how to pronounce it, is being used and is one of the biggest tools they have in these investigations. So in a little while, I'm going to go over some of the evidence that they recovered. And I'm not going to play the press conference from today. It was very, I'll just put it mildly, it was long-winded. And I wouldn't subject you guys to that again. But let me play a little bit more of this. This is from CBS News.
Serial killer on New York's Long Island has been arrested. 59-year-old Rex Heurmann was charged with the murders of 3 young women Friday. Officials say he is also the prime suspect in a 4th murder. The remains of the victims, along with 7 others, were found near Gilgo Beach on the south shore of Long Island more than 10 years ago. The suspect is a Manhattan architect who lived across the bay from the crime scenes. He has pleaded not guilty. Meg Oliver takes us inside the case.
Rex, did you do it?
Police say Rex Heuermann, a New York City architect, is the suspected serial killer they've been hunting for over a decade. Heuermann lived on this quiet street in Massapequa, Long Island. He was arrested near his Manhattan office last night and arraigned today.
Rex Heurmann is a demon that walks among us, a predator that ruined families.
Prosecutors said investigators were led to Heuermann initially after a witness reported seeing a pickup truck when one of the victims disappeared in 2010. Investigators later recovered his DNA from a pizza crust he discarded in Manhattan and matched it to genetic material found on the bodies. They also linked him to other evidence, including burner phones used to arrange meetings with the victims.
We're continuing to execute search warrants, and we anticipate getting more evidence.
Today, Heuermann was charged with murder in the deaths of 3 women and is the prime suspect of another victim whose bodies were first discovered on Long Island in 2010. The women, all sex workers, were found wrapped in burlap bags. Shannon Gilbert was among those who went missing after making this desperate call to 911.
There's somebody out there. Where are you, ma'am?
In all, police found the remains of 11 people in the area of Gilgo Beach, including a toddler. The killings terrorized residents around 40 miles from New York City for more than a decade.
To wake up and find out that that's where he lived, it's shocking.
On his website, Heuermann posted this interview that he gave last year, bragging about his work in New York City for 35 years.
When a job that should have been routine suddenly becomes not routine, I get the phone call.
In 2020, Melissa Kahn spoke to 48 Hours correspondent Erin Moriarty about the day her sister, Maureen Brannard Barnes, was discovered.
What I want most is answers and justice. And I also want that the world to know, like, my sister mattered.
Heuermann pleaded not guilty today based on the heinous nature of these crimes. He's being held without bail. His next court date is August 1st. Catherine?
Meg Oliver, thank you for your reporting. Let's bring in Mary Ellen O'Toole. She's a retired FBI special agent.
You know, folks, this is Mary Ellen O'Toole. She's been on the Idaho 4 case, of course, that I spoke where Brian Kohberger was arrested for and charged and being held in Idaho for the slaughter of 4 students using a K-bar knife. She spoke about there was a lot of discussion in that case on whether or not Brian Kohberger was a serial killer. And of course, I'm going to say Brian Kohberger, just like this defendant, are innocent until proven guilty. We're discussing the case. We're discussing the evidence they have in the case and the fact that they've been arrested. In this instance, Rex Heuermann is a serial killer. What are the traits that he has? How does he go about living a life as John Q. Citizen in a white suburban community, living in a middle to upper middle class community, working by day, taking the Long Island Railroad into Manhattan, running a small architect firm, but he has this scary, scary dark side that allows him to solicit prostitutes, sex workers, we use the euphemism for it, sex workers, search child porn on his community, and even more egregious, murder people. How is he able to go in and out of these worlds? The world of normalcy, where he was a father to 2 children. I believe one was an adopted son. I think his children are of adult age right now, and a daughter, and live this life, but have this dark, dark side to him. And serial killers sometimes are defined as organized or disorganized. He is undoubtedly an organized serial offender. He owns a car. He's intelligent. Obviously, he's an architect. He owns a home. He's able to travel. He's able to discern right from wrong, yet he doesn't, right? One of the curious things I found was, here is this man, obviously probably has a pretty good income, yet his own house looks run down and it looks really horrific. There was an interview with one of the members of the community. He said his house is a mess. We're all always complaining that his house makes the community look bad. So what is that about? Is that part of this personality of being a serial killer? Also, many of the things that enabled him to do this, premeditated. How did he not get caught for all this time? Just the purchase of a burner phone and the use of a burner phone shows premeditation and shows thinking about not getting caught for committing a horrific crime. For those of you listening that don't know what a burner phone is, it's just a phone that's a temporary phone that's untraceable. You can just buy it in a phone store, and when the minutes are up, you just throw the phone out. It was always thought to be not traceable till we have technology that can trace these burner phones. So all of this technology, as well as the DNA technology now, that with its investigative genetic genealogy And I've spoken, if you haven't listened to our show before, I've spoken before that investigative genetic genealogy using the SNP, it's called, as it gets very technical. It stands for single nucleotide polymorphism, as compared to STR, which is short tandem repeats. Short tandem repeats with DNA can get, 20 or 30 markers, whereas the SNP technology, single nucleotide polymorphism, can come up with millions of them. And I am not an expert on this, nor do I pretend to be, but because we've been working with this and doing quite a few of our shows, I have an understanding through listening a lot to probably the dean of investigative genetic genealogy, C.C. Moore, who undoubtedly would probably be interviewed in regarding this case. We're going to listen now to an former FBI agent that's an expert on serial killers and their personalities.
And the director of the forensic science program at George Mason University. So let's talk about the big difference first that technology made in this case.
Yeah, it's incredible how far we've come in terms of forensic science. So we've got incredible advances in DNA and then in cell phones. So that really made a difference in this case. And what's so interesting is that this offender committed these murders 10 years ago, thinking that none of this would have become significant and that he probably committed the perfect crime. And the issue is that he left forensic evidence behind. We just needed to wait for the technology to catch up.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that point. Look, some of this DNA evidence they're using is kind of very new, very revolutionary. Has it been tested in court?
Yes, it has, but it will be really tested in this case. And so that's what the defense will bring to the case, is all the questions about how is it collected, how is it processed, how is it analyzed, how is it interpreted, what are the credentials of the people who did all of that work. So it's not just the analysis itself, it will be a whole assortment of questions that the defense will pose to each one of the experts that come into that courtroom.
Based on your decades of criminal investigative experience, does this suspect fit the serial killer profile?
I get that question a lot. And I will say this, what we do know about most serial sexual killers, because his motivation was sexual, is that most have a psychopathic personality. The old term was sociopath. So these are people without a conscience. These are people with no remorse, but they tend to be glib and charming when you meet them. And there are other traits and characteristics of a psychopath. So beyond that, though, they kill differently. They use different weapons. They physically look very different. Most are, because they are glib and charming, fly under the radar screen. Their neighbors think they're nice guys, but as you dig deeper into their pathology, there's large differences between them. So there's not a single profile of a serial sexual killer.
Based on the evidence that's publicly available, what are some of the possible motives?
Well, sexual is the motive here. He was killing for sexual purposes. And this sounds, this is very dark, but when serial killers are strangling, stabbing, shooting their victims, they're sexually aroused by it. So their motivation is for sexual arousal. And in this case, I think we could even consider that sexual sadism could have been a part of that. What is sexual sadism? It is a paraphilic behavior, but the offender is sexually aroused by the infliction of physical or emotional pain.
Wow, they're suffering.
So that's
terrible.
It is, and we see that in the phone calls that he's made to the victim's family, which probably caused him to be aroused in the same way as he heard the family's pain on the other end of the phone.
Marianne O'Toole, thank you so much for your analysis.
So you heard from a former FBI agent that is an expert on serial killers, also a professor. It's disturbing to listen to that. Just the motivation was psychosexual in nature. Just think that this guy was out there committing these horrific crimes for as long as he did. I want to speak a little bit about some of the evidence that they have in this case, which is pretty amazing at this point. You see these are all. It'll probably turn out that he didn't commit all of these homicides. However, right now they have him for three murders, and on the screen, he was indicted for the murder of Melissa Bartolome, Amberlynn Costello, and Megan Waterman. Maureen Brainerd Barnes, there's a possibility he could be charged with that. Just realized that was 3 years before they found the other bodies, Maureen Brainerd Barnes. So this case goes back 16 years. So think of it. And one of the things that I thought was curious, and not just curious, but amazing, was that technology caught up to the criminal. Is that not incredible? That the technology we have now, one day, serial killers and serial rapists will never reach being a serial. And folks, for your information, to be a serial killer, it's 2 or more incidents with time in between. That's the FBI definition of what a serial killer is. If you kill 4 people in one incident, that's a mass murderer. That's not a serial killer. Just to give you the definition, the FBI definition of what a serial killer is. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. If you like real crime, a true crime from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. And if you like us, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and ring that bell. In fact, make comments. We love to read your comments. We love to comment on your comments, and we appreciate that. If you want to support us financially, we have a Patreon with 3 different levels, and we also have a YouTube channel membership with 5 different levels, and you see the folks in the green font. They're part of our YouTube family. Folks, so some of the evidence that they have here on Rex Heuermann, and just he's sort of an imposing, scary-looking figure when you see him walking with the police and how much larger he is than anyone else. Some of the evidence that they have in this case is they have Rex Heuermann's wife's DNA was found on 3 of the victims' bodies. That was per her hair. Her hair obviously was transferred from his body onto the victims' bodies. Back in 2010, that would have entailed the identification of mitochondria DNA, which was very difficult to identify. Again, now with investigative genetic genealogy, it has made it very possible to do that, whereas in 2010 it wasn't. So again, the technology has caught up to the criminals. One of Rex Heuermann's own hair was found on one of the victims' body. How potentially strong is that DNA evidence? Cell phone calls made from a burner phone to the victims were traced to his office. When we hear all of this stuff, folks, we sort of take it for granted that it was traced to his office. But that is pretty amazing, that you have no idea the amount of work, the amount of technology that is needed to do that, the cost to trace those burner phones and the cell site hits and all of the technology involved is a scientific marvel. And I know we just hear about it. We think they can do it in 10 minutes. No, that's not true. A call made to one of the victim's sisters after she died was traced to his office. Pretty amazing evidence. His Tinder profile with photos of him was linked to the burner phone. His Chevrolet pickup truck was seen by witnesses to one victim's disappearance. He matches descriptions of ogre-like man seen with one victim before she vanished. Heuermann conducted graphic searches for child porn and images of women being sexually abused. You know, folks, that is all part of his psychosis of being a psychosexual killer. Internet porn of child pornography on his computer. And another thing that was amazing about that was they were able to download or search his computer without arresting him. So they were able to remotely obtain this information from his computer. It was also revealed by District Attorney Tierney that he was searching his own computer with how do police track burner phones. These were some of his searches. The task force put together a search for the Long Island serial killer. What are they doing differently? How are they searching for the serial killer? Some of these things that were obviously showing his concern about this investigation, could it have been closing in on him? These are just some of the things. He also searched Google for updates on the case, searching why could law enforcement not trace the calls made by the Long Island serial killer. So all of these things were concerns of this killer. And now we know that he's been connected to these 3 cases, even though Maureen Brainerd Barnes is a good potentiality that he could be charged with that at a later time. But the 3 to her right, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello, that is what he's been charged with and indicted. He pled not guilty. Of course, when he was arrested, he did what we call in law enforcement. He lawyered up right away. He invoked counsel. What does that mean to you folks that aren't familiar with the criminal procedure? What that means is that he invoked an attorney. He invoked his right to counsel. What does that mean to law enforcement? That means all questioning must cease. If he says, I don't want to talk to you, I want an attorney, law enforcement investigators are not allowed to interview him any further. So he knew enough to, again, to keep his mouth shut. Now, will that make it much more difficult for the investigators in this case to connect him potentially to other cases? Yes, it will. However, there's things called physical evidence, and there's other evidence that they have, again, that we haven't heard about yet. We haven't been privy to. We haven't been told about all the evidence they have. I think they have, according to District Attorney Tierney, who gave that rather long press conference today, there was over 300 subpoenas issued for evidence that the investigators collected on this case. Over 300 subpoenas. Now, of course, there's going to also be search warrants on his home, search warrants on his office. If he owns any other property, search warrants on that, search warrant on his personal cell phone, as well as these burner phones. I'm sure they had subpoenas and search warrants to get the information. Now, what are the defense attorneys going to be looking at? Of course, they're going to be looking at how was the evidence collected? Where did they get the evidence? How did they come upon Rex Heuermann? How did they develop probable cause in making this arrest? These are all the things that we see in all of these cases. This also, we talked about them surreptitiously collecting DNA from a pizza box.
A Long Island man is facing murder charges in connection to New York's infamous Gilgo Beach serial case. Suffolk County's court documents show Rex Heuermann is facing 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of second-degree murder. He's accused of killing Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello between July of 2009 and September of 2010. Heuermann was arrested last night and arraigned this afternoon. Officials say the body of Maureen Brainerd Barnes was also found with the other 3 victims. However, Heuermann is not facing charges in connection to her death at this time.
For more, let's bring in CBS News correspondent Michael George. Michael, what can you tell us about what happened in the courtroom today?
Well, Errol, Lana, for more than 10 years, this has been one of the most notorious unsolved serial murder cases on the East Coast. Finally, this is the break that law enforcement were waiting for, the arrest of Rex Heuermann. We're learning some more details about exactly what led them to this suspect after more than 10 years. But just to give you a little background, where we are right now, Gilgo Beach, this is where the first victim's body was discovered in a burlap bag more than 10 years ago. And then after that, police started finding more and more bodies, at least 10 victims that we know of. But for 10 years, no major break in the case. That all ended in the last 24 hours with the arrest of Rex Heuermann. We do expect him to appear in court on 6 counts of murder shortly, and a lot more details to come about how they actually tracked him down. One thing that we do know, the clinching piece of evidence, a discarded pizza box that investigators took and linked DNA evidence to him. So we're awaiting some more details, but that is one of the key pieces that finally led to this arrest.
Wow.
That is a fascinating detail, Michael George. Talk to us more about last night's arrest. What else have you learned about what investigators were looking for on the property?
Folks, just so you know, one of the reasons law enforcement would surreptitiously collect DNA without letting the suspect know is obviously the element of surprise. They don't want the suspect to know that they're onto him. So when someone throws something in the garbage, legally they have no right to that property anymore because they threw it out. They have no expectation of privacy to that property. Was the DNA taken from the pizza box or the pizza? You know, not everyone eats all the crust of a pizza. So if you took a bite of a pizza and left the crust inside there, your saliva would be on that pizza. They could swab that with a cotton tip and do a DNA exemplar, and they would have his DNA. So that's what it means. And that is why police would surreptitiously collect DNA in this fashion. It's not as gee whiz and oh, wow. It's done all the time. All right. It was done in the Idaho case with Brian Koberger. The police searched the garbage at his house and they collected DNA, which turned out belonged to his father. And it was a 99.98 match to the DNA of the knife sheath that was found inside that apartment. Subsequently, they collected the suspect, Brian Koberger's DNA, and it was as close to 100% match to the knife sheath as you can possibly get. So just to clear that up, to sort of educate folks that aren't used to hearing why would they collect a pizza box? I think I explained it pretty well.
Property, what led them there?
Well, early indications from court documents is they've been looking at Heuermann for some time now. We don't, again, know what it was that initially triggered that, but they visited his home, which is about 20 miles from here where some of the bodies were discovered. It's about a 20-minute drive in Massapequa Park, a small red home in a quiet neighborhood, very unassuming. And what police say they discovered there were burner cell phones, some of which included details of calls that he allegedly made.
Folks, I think the news reporter misspoke. None of the bodies were discovered at his home. They were discovered on and around Gilgo Beach, along the road leading out there, along Ocean Parkway.
To some of his victims' family members after the murders. So they say that they found several pieces of critical evidence at his home, and that was part of the investigation. Police are still at that home right now, even as he's awaiting facing a judge in court.
It just gets more strange as you kind of lay out what's happened. I mean, I know for people in this part of New York, this part of the country, this has just shaken them to the core. Not only that there have been so many deaths and missing people, but that whoever may be behind it was still out there. What type of reaction are we hearing from the victims' families and even the community as we all learn more today?
Well, Errol, I can tell you that anybody who lives in this neighborhood here on Long Island, they've been aware of these murders for many, many years, but very few people expected that the killer would be found in such a quiet, unassuming neighborhood. Of course, it can happen anywhere, but neighbors are saying that they are shocked. Here's what we know about this suspect. He's an architect who works in Midtown Manhattan. He's a husband and a father to 2 children. So again, as we're learning more and more details about the suspect, what we're hearing from neighbors is shock. What we're hearing from the victims' families is tremendous relief that after 10 years and the possibility that they had considered that this case would never be solved, they are hopeful that this is finally the resolution they've been waiting for.
Oh, wow. Michael George, a lot of very stunning new developments. Thank you.
Now we turn to Pat Milton, the senior producer for CBS News' investigative unit. Pat, you also have been someone following every twist and turn of this case for quite a long time. We just heard some details about this suspect, but we understand he's facing 2 different types of murder charges in connection with all these deaths, or at least the deaths of 3 women, for a total of 6 counts. Just talk to us about the difference between the charges he's facing and why.
Well, Errol, yes, Michael's report was just fascinating. We are hearing right now, though, that he did face a judge in Suffolk County and pled not guilty to the charges against him, and that he was ordered held without bail at the request of the Suffolk County prosecutor. We did recently learn, too, that he was arrested in Manhattan late last night. He has an office, an architect's office in Manhattan, and he was arrested nearby, not at his home in Massapequa Park. But police, state police, Suffolk police, FBI did have a raid on his home. And interesting enough, his home is right across the bay from where Gilgo Beach is, where the remains of many of these women were found. We have learned, too, recently, as Michael just pointed out, that he is charged with the murders of 3 of the women. He's a suspect in one other, and we don't know whether he will be connected to any of the other 10 women that have been killed, and part of this unsolved murders in the last decade.
Yeah.
They've been trying to solve this puzzle.
10 women whose remains have been found in this area. We had heard from Aaron earlier that 4 of them believed to all have been having earmarks of potentially having the same perpetrator. When you say one other, I'm assuming that's Maureen Brainerd Barnes that you're referencing. Why are we not seeing charges in connection to her death?
Well, for some reason, the district attorney has chosen at this time not to charge him with, that particular murder. But we will find out more. The district attorney is having a news conference at 4, and hopefully we'll get more details on that. Just to add to what Michael had so described so well in detail, that one of the evidence that the police were looking at is that a pickup truck was seen in the area by a witness. And early on, they had told police about this pickup truck. And I think that what police are telling us is that they kind of went backwards then from the pickup truck. And then, as Michael just so fascinatingly described, the pizza box, getting the DNA, then getting a burner phone, realizing that he had made several calls to the victims and to the victim's sister on this burner phone.
All of that sounds like incredible police work connecting each.
Folks, the police work, and again, I could reiterate, it is amazing. They did an unbelievable job. You got to realize these bodies were found in 2010. That's 13 years ago. The one other victim that we spoke about, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, she was found in 2000, went missing in 2007. So 16 years ago. So all of these things that we're talking about, Shannon Gilbert, probably her case was the catalyst to getting the police out to Gilgo and searching these dunes where the bodies were found. And we don't know right now, we don't know in fact, if Shannon Gilbert was a victim of Rex Heuermann. We don't know that right now. But guess what? Rex Heuermann isn't going anywhere. he's going to be in prison. All right. He's going to be in jail awaiting trial. So there's plenty of time now for investigation. The killer, we hope right now, is off the street. Is there, I mean, there's going to be other people saying that, oh, he didn't act alone, he this and that. You know, we hear it on every single case. However, there's a good chance most serial killers do work alone. All right. So it's not like, I don't think people are worried that, oh, there's another serial killer out there. I think that people are pretty much feeling good about the fact that that they got their guy. You know, they have their guy right now. And I don't think that people are worried about that. Again, you can't say it enough times that the technology is unbelievable. You know what? I was on the NYPD from 1985 till October 31st, 2011, nearly 27 years. The first DNA hit they had in New York State that connected a serial killer happened in 1997. And the DNA technology was really, you know, antiquated as compared to what we have today. And that was a serial killing of a person who was arrested named Aaron Key, who was killing young girls in the East Harlem community, the 2-3 precinct and the 2-5 precinct. And that was the first time, I believe, in New York State history that they connected cases via DNA, 1997. So when you think where we are in 2023 with DNA, what advanced this technology so quickly? Certainly the World Trade Center attacks, 9/11, the experience that the New York City Office of the Chief Medical Examiner got doing those cases. And then, of course, which I've spoken about ad nauseum, is investigative genetic genealogy, which is just an incredible technology. And we can't talk enough about it. And that definitely came into play in this case, as well as cell phone technology, which is no small science. Look, investigation, as I say a million times on my show, it's an art and it's a science. And you put the art of investigation together with the science, and you have a very extremely, extremely powerful weapon that no criminal is going to defeat. And that's just the way it's going to be.
After years of unanswered questions, a break in the unsolved Gilgo Beach murders out of Long Island, as officials announce a suspect is now in custody. Multiple news outlets now reporting the suspect is 59-year-old Rex Heuermann of Massapequa Park.
Rex Heuermann, I'm an architect, I'm an architectural consultant, I'm a troubleshooter, born and raised on Long Island.
Local TV stations report Heuermann was taken into custody in Long Island early Friday morning when a special task force surrounded his home. An architect, Heuermann told YouTube reporters last year he's worked with New York City's Department of Buildings since the late 1980s.
I do troubleshooting, architectural troubleshooting, and negotiations with the building department.
But it was 23 years after his architecture career began in 2010 when the first body was recovered in the so-called Gilgo Beach murders. The investigation started in 2010 after escort Shanann Gilbert went missing near Gilgo Beach. In the search for Gilbert, investigators recovered 4 bodies on the beach, all women in their 20s who were working as escorts. In total, 9 women, 1 man, and a toddler have been discovered along the beach about an hour east of Manhattan. After the bodies were discovered, the murders mysteriously stopped. Just 1 year before his arrest, Heuermann said the most important aspect of his job is patience.
After all those years, what do you think is the most important qualities a person in your position dealing with the DOB must have?
Patience.
That's funny. I was hoping you would say that.
Yeah. Patience, and I don't like to use the word tolerance, but sometimes you have to.
In the interview, Heuermann said working with people was the most interesting aspect of his career.
But it's the people, how they're all so different, and how you deal with the people, I think, is one of the more interesting aspects that have come out of this.
We're still working to learn more details about Heuermann. We're expected to learn more Friday afternoon when the Suffolk County Sheriff's Office holds a press conference. Stay with Long Crime Network for the latest developments in this story. Reporting for Long.
So, folks, you see, here's a serial killer, again, innocent till proven guilty, who is living a normal life, in suburbia, living the American dream, yet committing these horrific, heinous crimes, and has flew under the radar for 13 years. Has this horrible, horrible secret about him. And not just the murders, but, patronizing prostitutes, sex workers, as they were referred to. But that's what makes this patternable. Police deal in patterns. When things happen in numbers, they throw resources at it. They put together the patterns, something called MO. You've heard of MO, which is Latin for modus operandi. What is the method of operation? Obviously, part of his modus operandi was using burner phones, wasn't it? Using burner phones. Another part of his modus operandi was calling sex workers, right? Another part of his modus operandi was using these burlap bags or burlap ties that tied up these sex workers, which collected enough evidence to identify him, right? Tape, using perhaps duct tape or some other kind of tape, which, guess what? Tape is a great source for collecting DNA and fingerprints. Fingerprints stay on the sticky side of tape. So all of those things are good evidentiary things, all right? What else? His car that he drove, which was identifiable. He had some sick parts of him also, right? Taunting the families, taunting the surviving family members. That's a sick psychopath that would do something like that. And you know what someone that analyzes serial killers, I believe Miss O'Toole, the former FBI agent who's now a professor, she spoke about that. That's his psychopathology, that he gets off on doing that. And when the reporter pressed her, what was the motive for this? This was a psychosexual motive. He gets off on doing this. That's how he gets off, right? And that's one of the reasons I think that the Suffolk County Police and this task force perhaps pulled the trigger on this arrest quicker, maybe, and I don't know this for sure, maybe than they would have liked to. Maybe they would have liked to have taken a little more time, but they were very much concerned with the fact that his behavior was continuing. He was still using sex workers, still calling sex worker phone numbers, and still, so they were concerned that he wouldn't stop killing. When they searched his computer remotely, they saw it had hundreds of child porn images on it. This is a sick psychosexual psychopath. And that's one of the reasons, or many of the reasons, why they pulled, as I said, they pulled the trigger on this case, because they wanted to make sure that he didn't kill anyone else. The police, Rodney Harrison, again, an NYPD guy, we can't say enough good things about our brother from the NYPD. When he took over the Suffolk County Police, of course, as the police commissioner, he had already been the chief of detectives on the NYPD, and he had already been the chief of department, which is the highest ranking uniform member of the service on the NYPD. So he had a resume second to none. I give Rodney Harrison a lot of credit putting together this task force. And of course, we got to give everyone credit. The Suffolk County DA's office, the FBI, the state police, all right? And of course, the Suffolk County detectives who have been working this case through all kinds of criticism, all kinds of finger pointing, all kinds of innuendos. You guys aren't working hard on this because these are sex workers. You don't care about them. And believe me, that was proven not to be true. They absolutely do care about these victims. And folks, one of the things that we also have to realize, and I mention it in every single case we cover, is that this case is about the victims and about the victims' families. And right now, there's a certain amount of closure for the families of Melissa Bartolome, Amberlynn Costello, and Megan Waterman. We still don't know if he will be charged with the homicide of Maureen Brainerd Barnes. But those families and those victims hopefully will get closure when he spends the rest of his life in state prison. But we always have to remember that this is about the victims.
Let's hear now from a person who used to work on the Gilgo Beach case. Joining us now from Suffolk County is the former police commissioner and district attorney, Timothy Sini. Timothy, thanks for making the time for us today. He's joining us now by phone. You know, earlier we heard DA Tierney say that investigators ID'd the suspect, Heuermann, as a suspect actually in March of last year. Can you tell us whether or not if he was a suspect during your time in office as well?
I go into any details about investigation that has not been publicly released in open court today. I will say that investigation has been going on at an intense level for several years, and it's so satisfying to see that this case has now been charged and brought into this next chapter where now the DA's office needs to focus on securing justice in the courtroom. And it'll be interesting to see if the defendant led the people to go to trial and test their evidence in court. And I'm confident that at the end of the day, although the defendant is entitled to the presumption of innocence, I'm confident that the people will prevail and prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Given your experience in the case, also just in law enforcement and also at the DA's office, DA Tierney also mentioned today that he would have liked to keep this task force together and continue this investigation, but he alluded to the fact that making the arrest now was important. What do you think was behind that?
Take a dangerous person off the streets as soon as...
You know, folks, we just spoke about that. I think the District Attorney Tierney and his task force were afraid that he was going to kill again because he was behaving in the same fashion that he has for over all these years, continuing to see sex workers, continuing to use burner phones, having child pornography on his computer. So those are the reasons I think they pulled the trigger on this arrest. And I'm not saying they did it prematurely, but that was their concerns.
Possible. I mean, clearly you have to develop enough evidence to have cause for the arrest, but you also want to make sure you're going to be able to prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt. And your ability to collect evidence regarding an individual is hampered when it becomes public and when the person is arrested. So it's a balancing act between taking someone off the street as soon as possible, but ensuring that you obtain enough evidence to prove that person's guilt in a court of law.
What do you think made this case so tough to crack?
The victims, unfortunately, went missing and were murdered some time ago. You know, we're talking about 4 victims. The dates of 2007, 2009, 2010. And the other issue is, when I came in and first being with leading the investigation, you know, the investigation was in disarray. You had a police commissioner and a district attorney who were publicly fighting about different theories regarding the case. You had a district attorney and a chief of department actively blocking the FBI from assisting. And you had certain investigative tasks that were not done when they should have been done. And so there was a lot of catch up to do, and that's exactly what we did. And I'm so satisfied to see that this was brought across the finish line.
Rex Heuermann has been charged with 3 murders. He's also the prime suspect in a 4th, but there have been other people in this case, other victims in this case included in the Gilgo Beach murders. Do you think that there are more suspects?
Comment on that. I will reiterate what was said in open court, that or as they're commonly referred to, the defendant is the prime suspect in that case, and I suspect that case will be charged in short order. And obviously, the investigation continues with respect to the other victims.
Former Suffolk County Police Commissioner and District Attorney Timothy Sini, thanks for joining us.
Well, folks, that's about our show tonight. I want to thank everyone for coming by. Tomorrow night, I have an unbelievable guest coming on, Dr. Joni Johnston, a forensic psychologist who is an expert on serial killers. She's an expert on behavioral analysis. She's going to come on the show tomorrow at 9 o'clock, and she's going to sort of dissect the personality of Rex Heuermann. What causes people to do this? What personality traits did he show? Could anyone have predicted this or saw his behavior and predicted that he was doing what he was doing? See what, the FBI early on in this case did have their behavioral analysts do a profile on who and what they thought the serial killer was. And so let's see what Dr. Joni Johnston says to us tomorrow night. And again, I want to thank all you guys. Let's think about the victims' families. And again, a huge, huge shout out to Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison and the entire Gilgo Beach Task Force, Long Island Serial Killer Task Force, however you want to refer to them, the Suffolk County DA's office, their investigators, the FBI, the state police. We want to give them a huge, huge thumbs up. As Rodney Harrison said when he went to the microphone at today's press conference, this is a good day because we caught this monster. Folks, I'm Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you tomorrow night.
One episode just ain't enough.